Locked On Podcast Network and State Farm present Paving the Way, a new series highlighting important voices across Locked On's network. Every month, our host Kanani Stevens will showcase other Locked On hosts who come from underserved communities to hear the challenges they face to become a sports broadcast personality. Who will be paving the way this episode? Find out now.
State Farm believes it's important to champion diverse voices and create positive impacts in our neighborhoods. That's why our good neighbors at State Farm are proud to support the Paving the Way series and their mission to provide support to underserved communities. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. On today's episode, we speak to Jay Forster from Locked On Blue Jackets about his journey as a trans male, finding joy through sports in an unlikely way. Want to welcome in Jay Forster. Thank you so much for joining us on this edition of Paving the Way. I usually start with kind of how you grew up, how you got into sports as a kid, but you told me you weren't really into sports as a kid. So tell me a little bit about where you grew up and kind of what that was like for you.
So I grew up in the northeast of England, if people can't tell from my accent. And yeah, I kind of got into sports by accident, I think. I was in college. And I was looking for things to do, and I'd moved to a new city, didn't really know anyone, and I was living in the dorm room right next to the campus gym, and they had a mixed martial arts class there, and I was like, hey, I'll try this out. It seems fun, and I was like, oh, actually, sports are great. I ended up getting into hockey specifically because of the Winter Olympics, and I was watching the women's gold medal game against Canada and USA, which to this day is still one of the best games I've ever seen. And at the time, I was still identifying as female. And I was like, oh, it sounds really stupid at the time, but I was like, oh, I didn't know women could play as well. And so I started looking for places to play, and I ended up finding a local recreational beer league team, learning to play. And then I kind of got into wanting to learn more and more and more about the sport, wanting to work in the sport. And then it's all snowballed. And now here I am. And it's kind of accidentally my entire life.
Absolutely, entirely obsessed with it. I love that for you. How did kind of playing it make you love it more? Like, obviously, as a fan, sometimes we like any sport that we've played, I'm sure, even if it's just rec or whatever, I feel like that gives you that a little bit more love for it, right? Like a little more appreciation of how difficult maybe some stuff is. Do you feel like that helps you a little bit when you're like, oh, that's really, really hard? Like, I literally understand that.
Oh yeah, for sure. And it looks so impressive, like on TV and when you go to games and stuff, it looks super impressive. And then you get on the ice and you're like, oh, actually, this is even more impressive. I play at a very, very low level compared to, the NHL, obviously, but just like that extra understanding of the game and meeting more people who really love the sport as well helped, because it's not a huge thing over here in England. We have some leagues, but it's not one of the big four sports. It's not soccer. And so finding a community of people that also cared about this quote unquote niche sport was really fun and cool. And I was like, oh, okay, now I have people to talk to about this. And then, I would learn more things about teams. We've got a couple of Canadian expats on my beer league team, and so they obviously grew up with the sport. They've got all of this knowledge of the game from the 80s and the 90s and way before my time. And so you just you pick things up and you learn things, and the more I learned, the more I kind of wanted to learn more, and it just kind of snowballed from there.
Did you know immediately that you were like, oh, maybe I can do sports media, or did you kind of end up there? How did that happen for you?
So I have always enjoyed writing. So I went to college for English. So I have a bachelor's and a master's in English literature. And so I thought that writing was a thing that I wanted to do. And I wasn't sure how that would kind of combine with sports. Originally, what I wanted to do was, oh, this sport's really cool. I would love to work for a team in some kind of aspect, but I wasn't sure how that would kind of shape up or how that would make sense. And then I started writing kind of as a way to talk about the things in sport that I either enjoyed or didn't enjoy so much. So I had a couple of, I started off with blogs that didn't really go anywhere. And then in 2015, I was still. So when I first got into hockey, I went to the Chicago Blackhawks because I was considered them like the gateway team for that time. They were they just won like the Stanley Cup in 2013. This was spring of 2014. And so in 2015, one of the players was accused of sexually assaulting someone. And the way that the team handled that, I thought was very poor, was really disheartening. And I ended up writing this whole long thing about it. I didn't mean to. I just kind of sat down one day and wrote it all out. And I was like, oh, maybe this is something that like I could do. And, you know, it felt different to write about the sport that isn't the sport, if that makes sense. You know, the off ice stuff I feel like doesn't get as much airtime as the you know the fun goals and the highlight reels and stuff. And so I wrote that, and then I kind of left it for a while. Again, got into a couple of other things, wrote for a couple of sites briefly, and then in 2019, just before the world shut down, I ended up talking to a guy called John Holmes, who worked for Sky Sports at the time, which is one of the biggest sports networks over here. And he basically wanted to talk to me about my experience of being LGBT in hockey for, it would have been Pride Month. So it would have been around this time, actually, in 2019. And so he wrote a story about me and, you know, my experience playing hockey as a trans person. And after that, it just kind of snowballed from there. Again, I wrote a couple of pieces for him. I ended up joining the Locked On Network, kind of not off the back of that, but that was the thing that really kind of gave me the push to be like, oh, maybe this is an area I can work in. And so it was all kind of, it felt very organic at the time. And then looking back, I'm like, oh, okay, no, like lots of things had to go right for this exact thing to fall into place.
There's always a little bit of luck with stuff like that, but obviously a lot of hard work as well. When we talk on the show a lot about sometimes like, you know, because your path is everybody's path is a little bit different. Sometimes it's that way because you don't really see anybody that looks like you, that does the job that you want to do. So you're kind of like, does it even exist? Like, how do I get there? Have you had experiences like that where you're kind of like, I don't see any representation of myself. Like, how do I get to where I want to be?
Yeah, definitely. And like, I recognize that sounds really stupid, like sitting here as a white guy saying, oh, no one looks like me. But and you know, we had some pre-interview conversation and talked about like, you know, who inspires you as a sports media, who looks like you. And I kind of thought about it and I was like, I don't know that I could tell you the name of a single openly transgender sports writer, you know? And so I think that's kind of what pushes me is I'm not the biggest name in the world. You know, I've got my podcast. I've got a couple hundred Twitter followers. I would love to be the inspiration for other trans people to realize, hey, you've got a space in this sport. You can do this as well.
I think so much of that is just kind of you don't necessarily have to make yourself like a billboard for anything, but just like being yourself, right? And just like doing your job and being open about who you are. And I think sometimes that's hard for people to obviously it's hard for people to share that with their family and people in their lives, but then also do it on this kind of platform. Did you struggle with anything like that? Or were you kind of at a place where you felt comfortable with it by the time you got to this point?
Yeah, I think I was pretty comfortable with it. So I came out in 2017 to like my friends and my family, but I'd kind of been going that way. Like I was out online before I came out in the real world, so to speak. Yep. And so by this point, I've been out for 5-6 years now. And I talk a lot about how I don't think that queer people should be resources necessarily. You know, Google exists. You don't have to go and find a queer person and ask them about this or that or whatever, because you can just Google it. That being said, I have always wanted to be a resource for people. And if people have questions about, you know, being trans or being part of the LGBT community, I will, or if they are asked in good faith and they are, you know, seem like they are like genuinely willing to learn. Like I'm always happy to answer questions. Like I know when I came out, I had a handful of guys from a hockey team who would reach out. Like we have a lot of guys whose day jobs are teachers. And so they came to me and they were like, hey, I saw this story in the news about something. Can you explain this? Or, can you explain why what this person said is wrong? So things like that. So I've always wanted to be that. And I'm sure she won't mind me sharing this on here, but I understand that Robin Liano was on Paving the Way, very good friend of mine. And I think she came to me when she was kind of thinking about coming out and doing it publicly and, being a transgender sports person. And so I think that was a really nice moment of, oh, this is someone I work with. Mm-hmm. And we have this kind of this bond, I guess, of being, I think, the only two openly transgender podcast hosts on the Locked On Network, which is a really fun thing.
Absolutely. I'm sure that you guys can really use each other in that and just kind of relation and just like, if anything, just to talk about things, I'm sure.
There's a lot of sending tweets of people saying dumb stuff to each other and being like, can you believe this guy?
I'm sure. I do not doubt that for a second. I remember when I spoke to Robin, I kind of talked to her a little bit about, because she picked up hockey a little bit later as well. Mm-hmm. I remember her telling me that wasn't her like maybe first sport either, but I think with hockey, it's obviously people are very passionate about it. And I feel like sometimes the way the league deals with some things is a little disheartening. I know with like their pride nights and some different things that they do, that's always a little disheartening for me. And I kind of just talked to her about like how she deals with that. Do you have the same issue, like kind of seeing some of that stuff and just being like, oh, that's kind of not great, but like, how do you kind of internalize and deal with that?
Yeah, it's so disappointing. And like, this is coming off the back of, so we're recording this the morning after an announcement that they are getting rid of warm-up jerseys. So they're not going to be doing the pride jerseys in warm-ups. Mm-hmm. They're not going to be doing, Black History Night. They're not going to be doing, some teams do like Indigenous or First Nations celebration nights or Chinese heritage or, any of these nights to celebrate kind of the diversity in this sport. And it is disappointing and it's frustrating. And I think a lot about something that a very good friend of mine, Chanel Keenan, says, and she was the diversity and inclusion person for the Seattle Kraken for a little while. Mm-hmm. She is she's a great person. She's so committed to, again, diversity and making sure that everyone has a voice. And mm-hmm. she always says she can't change the sport if she leaves. And so that's kind of how I think. And every time I see this and I'm like, this sport doesn't want me here. Mm-hmm. Well, tough. I'm not going anywhere. And every time I see the comments of people being like, gay people don't belong in sport and trans people shouldn't be allowed to play sports and why do we even need a pride night and, blah, 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 all of this stuff that I see kind of on a daily basis every time I dare to tweet about existing as a hockey fan who is also part of the LGBT community. I'm like, these people want me to leave. Mm-hmm. I think about leaving, but that feels like letting them win. And I am stubborn enough and petty enough that that ain't gonna work. I am here and I'm not going anywhere. And I think that helps. I think the knowledge that me being in this sport makes bigots unhappy.
There we go. I love the pettiness. Sometimes you need to. That's the drive we need. Yeah, that's the drive we need. Just like, I know this is making me mad, so I'm going to do it anyway.
Right.
Obviously it's tough for anybody in that kind of space. So I enjoy that you guys, I'm saying you and Robin kind of have each other to bounce off of and then kind of, take that stance to it. That's a great way to be about it. Can we talk a little bit about, I know you kind of had some stuff going on and then how you ended up at Locked On. And parts of I've loved about Locked On is they're like some of the best bosses I've ever had. And they're just so super supportive of all the things that you want to do. And I feel really fortunate sometimes that I'm like, oh, this is like really great. Do you feel like they were always kind of supportive of all the things that you wanted to do and how you wanted to be and speak about yourself?
Oh, 100%. I want to kind of start off with the people that work at Locked On. I have been consistently amazed by, and the bar is like so low for me.
Same. Yeah,
because
absolutely.
it's, but every time I see, I'll see hosts tweeting about how bad these trans banning bills are, or they'll be tweeting about, they'll be retweeting things like protect trans kids or banning books or don't say gay in Florida. And I'll see Locked On hosts speaking out about all of this stuff. And it just makes me feel like, okay, this is a good place to work. I want to specifically shout out Sean Woodley, who is the channel coordinator for the NHL channel, and I guess technically my boss. He has consistently gone above and beyond to make sure that I am comfortable in this network. He is, he'll constantly just every so often, he'll send me little messages like, hey, like he sent me a message on the start of the month, like, hey, happy Pride Month. Keep being you rock, just little things like that. He'll reach out every so often and be like, I saw this in the news. It sucks. This league sucks. People suck. Hope you're doing okay. Let me know if there's anything that I or the network can do. So like, yeah, I am just every time I'm real glad that Sean is such a great guy and that I get to work with him.
It's so simple, just like even check-ins or just like acknowledgement sometimes I feel like is so huge because you don't get it from other places. So it's always just nice to be like, oh, like you like understand what I'm talking, like you get it, like you're on the same page as me. Like that's very reassuring. And I felt like a lot of the people I work with at Locked On are really like locked into that, if we want to say. So I appreciate that. I'm glad you do too. We talked a little bit about kind of, you weren't into sports at first and you kind of got into it. Did you have anybody that either mentored you or kind of helped you get to where you are today?
Yeah, so I mentioned John Holmes from Sky Sports earlier. He now has gone fully freelance, I believe. He is the founder of Sports Media LGBT+, which is a website in the UK that covers like queer issues across all of sports. And so that was where he wrote about that's where I kind of got my start in this sports writing stuff. And again, it would have been Pride Month 2020. I reached out to him and said, hey, I'm interested in doing some stuff. Do you think your site would be interested? And he was like, yeah, absolutely. And so that's where I kind of got my start. And he is constantly, again, he's just every so often he'll reach out and be like, hey, I've got this, I heard this story. Do you want to write something for it? Or, can you tell me about this? Or, if I do something for another network or another thing, he'll retweet that and give it like shout outs and stuff. And so he's someone that I don't know that I would necessarily consider him a mentor in the way that like we've worked together and he's like, I don't know how I want to say this. I don't know that I would call him a mentor in the terms of like a teacher.
Right.
But he's definitely someone that has kind of supported me and given me that space to do what I want to do, which is write about, at the very end of the day, what I want to write about is queer joy in sport. I don't want to write these articles about how stupid it is that they're banning Pride jerseys or whatever, which is not what they're doing, but for sake of expediency. I want to write about happy things.
Yeah.
I want to write about queer people getting to play the sports that they love, things like that. And he gave me a place to do that. And he has given me the support to do that, which is really great.
I think sometimes just facilitating that and having the, the venue to do that is huge as well. So I definitely understand where you're going with it. I know we talked a little bit about kind of being necessarily a role model, but just being a visible face for different, whether it's queer kids or just whoever, can relate to the situation that you're in. Do you have advice for anybody like that? I know it's kind of hard and broad to give out, but like maybe the people that are thinking, I want to get involved in sports media, but I don't see anybody like me.
Yeah, I think for me, it was just, well, if no one out there is like me and is doing this, then well, I guess I have to, someone's got to, someone has to be the first, and it might as well be you. And, you'll be the first, but you won't be the only one, So I think sometimes if you take that first step, someone else will take a step behind you. And that's kind of how I go is I if I have to take that first step and I have to, take the burden, I guess, of being the first person, then sure. But I'm having the time of my life doing what I love, and I think that's what matters. Like, I think a lot about, hockey specifically is, and this is not necessarily relevant, but it's a story that I thought I wanted to share, is hockey as a sport is so weirdly insular of like, they want people, they constantly say, well, my sport's better than yours. But then when new people come to the sport, they're like, no, we don't want you, you know? And that's always so stupid to me, because the way I see it, I'm like, this sport is awesome. I love this sport. Why wouldn't you want everyone? Like, I'll stop people on the street and tell them about this sport, you know? Like, why wouldn't you want as many people to care about the sport as much as you do? And that's kind of how I see it, is if you love this sport, if you think you could love this sport, come on in. It doesn't matter if, you know, what your race is, what your gender is, what your sexuality is, what your class is, you know, like if you want to be in this sport, then you should be in this sport, and don't let anyone else stop you, because again, sometimes you existing in this sport will make bad people angry. And I think there's something really cathartic in that.
Absolutely. I love that you take that in. It feels good. They're angry and it feels good. Before we end the show, we do want to highlight an organization that we're working with in an effort to support paving the way for future generations faced with less favorable opportunities. State Farm and Locked On are pairing up. They're going to be giving a donation to the incredible organization Everyone On for every host that we feature on this series. The mission for Everyone On is to unlock opportunity by connecting families in underserved communities to affordable internet services and digital literacy training. So doing so creates significant positive change in communities and society as a whole. Big thank you to our good neighbors at State Farm for their support on behalf of our hosts and helping to pave the way for so many others in our communities. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. State Farm and Locked On Network share a common goal, helping to make our communities a better place. State Farm is committed to helping amplify individuals and organizations that lead the way in diversity, inclusion, and social good, because we know that investing in community building and uplifting diverse voices is crucial to creating a sense of belonging. State Farm is proud to sponsor the Paving the Way series and celebrate the change makers that have paved the way in making our neighborhoods a better place for everyone. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there.